Hi, welcome back. In the previous lesson, we talked about adding integers that had the same sign, so both positive, both negative. Right now, we're going to talk about adding integers with different signs. But before we do that, we're going to talk about something called opposites on a number line. So an opposite on a number line or opposites on a number line, are two numbers that are the same distance from 0, but on opposite sides of 0. So an example of that might be -3 and 3. And do you remember what happened when we added them yesterday? They became 0, so they're opposites. So we're going to talk about adding integers with different signs. So adding integers with different signs. You thought my board writing was messy? Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to subtract. First step is to subtract the lesser absolute value from the greater. From the greater absolute value. Remember, we talked about this yesterday also when we made up that table. We talked about what happened when you had integers with different signs. And you guys knew the answer to this, and then we went back and we kind of talked about how we got there. And we said that we were asking, well, whether those numbers were positive or negative depending upon what the values were of the original numbers. So, and then you use the sign of the integer, of the integers with the greatest absolute value. So this is kind of how you do it this way. So let's use an example. We're going to say, I'm going to take example A. We're going to say 5 plus a -10. Oh, which is that equal? Remember, we'll put parentheses around there so we don't get confused by that positive and negative next to each other. All right, so we're going to say that the absolute value of -10 is greater than the absolute value of 5. And it is, because it ends up, if you evaluate this, 10 is greater than 5. So we then take 10 and we subtract 5. That's this step up here. And we end up with 5. Okay, so now what is the sign? Well, so we're going to use the sign of the integers with the greatest absolute value. Well, -10, the absolute value of -10 had the greater absolute value. So that is a negative, so your 5 ends up being negative. And if you think about that, if you take 5 steps forward on a number line and then take 10 steps back, you end up in negative territory. All right, let's try another one. Let's try B. So example B is -3 plus 7. Well, the absolute value, so if I take the absolute value of 7, is greater than the absolute value of -3. So I subtract 3 from 7, and I end up with 4. And we know that the sign is positive because the absolute value of 7 is greater than the absolute value of negative 3, and 7 is positive. So we know that that is positive. Okay, let's scroll down a little bit more and do one more example. Okay, we're going to say negative 12 plus 12 is equal to 0. Well, it turns out that negative 12 and, oops, how do we know that it was 0? Let's back up a little bit. So it turns out that negative 12 and 12 are opposites on the number line. So when you add those together, you end up with 0. Okay, so now you're going to try some on your own. You might have noticed it looks like it's getting a little bit dark out here because I am out on my deck, because that is the only place that it is cool. So let's try some on your own. Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted it to do. All right, undo drawing. So let's start by doing some on your owns. So we're going to say negative 2 plus 11, 9 plus a negative 10, and negative 31 plus 31. All right, pause the video and try these on your own and come back. Well, welcome back. Let's see how you did. So we're going to take the absolute value of 11, and that is greater than the absolute value of negative 2. So I'm going to say 11 minus 2 is equal to 9. And since the absolute value of 11 was the greatest, its sign is positive, so this ends up being a positive 9. Over here, we are saying that this is 9 plus negative 10, so the absolute value of negative 10 is, is larger than the absolute value of 9. So 10 minus 9 is equal to 1. And the sign of the larger absolute value is negative, so it ends up being a negative number. This math actually isn't technically right. I suppose we should really be rewriting this and say 9 plus a negative 10 is equal to negative 1. The last one, sorry, there's mosquitoes out here. The last one is negative 31 plus 31. And these, again, are opposites, so the answer to that is just 0. Well, I think you're ready to go do your homework. I'll see you in class.